I don't usually talk about things like this. I've spent most of my life letting silence do the work for me, letting moments breathe, letting actions say what words can't. But tonight, this isn't about performance. This isn't about a story I'm proud of. This is about a moment that stripped something away from me and then gave something back that I didn't even know I'd lost. And if you had told me years ago that I'd be sitting alone in the dark every single morning, giving an hour of my life to prayer, not asking for anything, not saying much at all, I probably would have smiled politely and changed the subject, because that wasn't me, or at least I didn't think it was. I've lived a full life. I've seen success. I've walked red carpets, stood under bright lights, heard applause echo in rooms bigger than I ever imagined stepping into when I was younger. I've worked with people I respect deeply. I've been given opportunities most people never get, and I'm grateful for that, truly. But here's the part we don't talk about enough. Success can be loud. It fills every corner of your life. And sometimes, without realizing it, it drowns out the one voice that actually matters. About 5 years ago, I started waking up before the world did. Not because I had somewhere to be, not because I was chasing something. I've always woken up early, but this was different. I'd open my eyes, and there was this weight in my chest, not fear, not sadness exactly, just unfinished, like a sentence that never found its ending. I'd sit there in the quiet, watching the sky slowly change colors, and instead of peace, I felt restless. That was new for me. I didn't understand it. From the outside, my life looked complete. From the inside, something was missing, and I didn't have the language for it yet. I wouldn't call myself religious in the way people usually mean it. I believe in God. I always have. But belief and relationship aren't the same thing. For a long time, God was more like a distant truth than a present reality. I'd say a quick prayer here and there, a thank you when something went right, a please when something felt uncertain, but there was no listening, no stillness, just words tossed into the air, hoping they landed somewhere. One morning, I was sitting with an old friend, the kind of man who's been broken by life and somehow came back gentler instead of bitter. We were talking about time, about what it does to you if you let it. And he looked at me and asked something that cut straight through all the noise I'd been carrying. He said, "When's the last time you stopped long enough to listen? Not to people, not to the world, to God." To your own soul, I didn't have an answer, and that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. He told me about something he'd been doing for years. He called it the 1 hour prayer rule, 1 full hour every day. No agenda, no checklist, no speeches, just showing up, sitting still, listening, letting God speak instead of filling the silence myself. My first reaction was resistance. An hour felt excessive. I've spent my life valuing efficiency. Movement, progress. Sitting still for 60 minutes felt like doing nothing, and doing nothing has always made me uncomfortable. But there was something about him, the calm in his eyes, the way he wasn't in a hurry to explain himself. I realized I wanted what he had, even if I didn't fully understand it. So I told him I'd try it, just 1 week. No promises beyond that. The first morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was dark. The world was quiet in that way it only is before dawn. I sat down, closed my eyes, and said the simplest thing I could think of. God, I'm here. And then, nothing. My mind immediately started racing. Scenes from unfinished projects, conversations I needed to have, problems I thought I'd already solved showing up again. 20 minutes felt like an hour. I checked the time and felt almost embarrassed. This wasn't peaceful. It was uncomfortable. I wanted to quit, but something in me stayed. That hour ended, and I stood up feeling frustrated. But I showed up again the next morning, and the next. The first week was a fight. Not with God, with myself, with the noise I didn't even realize I was carrying around every day. Thoughts don't like to be ignored. They demand attention, and when you stop running, they catch up fast. But I kept sitting down, same time, same place, same silence, and slowly. Something started to change, not dramatically, no lightning, no voices, just a soft shift. The quiet stopped feeling threatening. The silence stopped feeling empty. It started to feel honest, like I was finally sitting face to face with parts of myself I'd been avoiding for years. And somewhere in that stillness, something else began to surface. A memory I hadn't thought about in decades, a small room, a woman kneeling by her bed, hands folded, eyes closed, completely at peace. My grandmother. I remembered standing in the doorway as a kid, watching her pray, not saying much, just being there. And when she noticed me, she smiled and motioned for me to join her. We knelt together in silence, and after a while, she said something that came back to me in that moment with surprising clarity. God is always talking. We're just not always quiet enough to hear him. Sitting there in the dark, years later, I realized something that stopped me cold. God hadn't been absent from my life. I had been absent from him. Not because I didn't believe, but because I never slowed down long enough to listen. And that realization cracked something open inside me. After that morning, I didn't rush to explain what happened. I didn't tell anyone. Some experiences don't need witnesses. They need space. I carried that memory of my grandmother with me through the day like something fragile, something sacred. And the next morning, when the alarm went off, I didn't hesitate. I didn't argue with myself. I just got up, sat down, closed my eyes, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I was just there. That's when I realized something important. Most of my life, even when I prayed, I was still in control. I chose the words. I chose the timing. I decided when it was over. This hour was different. It wasn't about control. It was about surrender. And surrender doesn't come easily to someone who's spent decades playing characters who survive by being strong, silent, unbreakable. As the days turned into weeks, the silence started doing work on me. Not the kind of work you can measure or show to someone else. The kind that happens underneath everything. The kind that asks uncomfortable questions. Questions I'd avoided for years because they slowed me down. In that quiet, I started noticing how tired I really was. Not physically, spiritually. I'd been carrying a weight I didn't remember picking up. I began to see patterns in my thoughts, how quickly my mind went to fixing, solving, achieving, how uncomfortable I felt just being present without producing something. It hit me that I had built my entire identity around usefulness, around contribution, around being needed, and in that stillness, God started gently peeling those layers back, not accusing, not condemning, just revealing. There were mornings when regret showed up uninvited. Moments I wished I could revisit, conversations I wished I'd handled differently, times I chose work over people, distance over vulnerability, silence over honesty. I didn't like seeing those things. But the strange part was, I didn't feel crushed by them either. I felt, understood, as if God wasn't pointing a finger, but opening a door and saying, let's look at this together. I started crying more than I expected. Quiet tears, no drama, just release, years of holding things in. Years of believing strength meant not needing anyone. I realized how much of my life I'd spent proving something, proving I was capable, proving I could handle loss, proving I could stand alone, and in that hour I finally admitted the truth. I didn't want to stand alone anymore. God showed me how pride can hide inside discipline, how self-reliance can look like maturity, how independence can quietly become isolation. I saw how often I took credit for things that were never fully mine to claim: talent, timing, opportunity, breath, all gifts, things I'd received long before I earned them. Gratitude stopped being a polite thought and became something heavier, something humbling. There were also moments of surprising peace, moments where no thoughts came at all, just awareness, just presence. I'd sit there, breathing slowly, and feel grounded in a way I never had before. like I wasn't floating through my own life anymore, like I had finally arrived inside it. Those moments didn't last long at first, but they were enough to keep me coming back. One morning, a realization surfaced that changed how I saw my past. I had always thought faith was something you either held onto or lost along the way. But sitting there, it felt more like faith had been waiting for me. Patient, unoffended, not keeping score, just present. That thought broke something open again. The idea that God hadn't been disappointed in my absence, just ready for my return. As months passed, the hour became non-negotiable. It wasn't a habit anymore. It was a meeting. The rest of the day started orbiting around it. Decisions became clearer. Reactions slowed down. I listened more, not just to God, but to people. I noticed pauses in conversations I used to rush past. I started hearing what wasn't being said. People around me noticed the shift before I talked about it. They said I seemed calmer, less guarded, more present. I didn't always know how to explain it. How do you explain silence doing surgery on your soul? How do you put words to something that's still unfolding? So I didn't try. I just lived differently. God also showed me something else during those hours, that I'd been confusing peace with control. I thought peace came from managing outcomes, from staying ahead of problems, from being prepared. But real peace, the kind that settles deep in your bones, comes from trust, from letting go of the need to predict everything, from admitting you're not the one holding it all together. There were mornings when fear crept in, questions about time, about aging, about how much road was left. Those thoughts used to tighten my chest, but in that quiet, they softened. I realized I didn't need answers to every question. I just needed to know I wasn't walking alone. One morning, without warning, a question formed in my heart. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it landed with weight. What do you want to be remembered for? I'd heard that question before. I'd answered it easily before, but sitting there, stripped of performance and image, I couldn't hide behind polished responses. The usual answers felt empty. I didn't want to be remembered for characters I played or accolades I collected. I wanted to be remembered for how I loved, for whether I was present, for whether people felt seen around me, for whether my life pointed to something bigger than me. That realization quietly rearranged my priorities. From that day on, the hour didn't just shape my mornings, it started shaping my choices, the stories I said yes to, the pace I kept, the way I showed up for my family. Conversations got deeper, apologies came easier. I started admitting when I didn't have it all figured out, and instead of losing respect, I found connection. That hour taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Strength isn't about holding everything together. It's about knowing when to lay things down, when to stop striving, when to trust that the story is bigger than the role you're playing. And every morning in that quiet, I was reminded of something simple and profound. I didn't have to perform for God. I didn't have to impress him. I just had to show up, and that was enough. Somewhere along the way, that hour stopped feeling like something I was doing for God and started feeling like something God was doing for me. I didn't announce it. I didn't make it a philosophy. It just became the quiet center everything else revolved around. The strange thing was, the more still I became in that hour, the more intentional I became outside of it. Life didn't slow down, but I did, and that changed everything. I started noticing how often I reacted instead of responded, how quickly I used to fill space with words just to avoid discomfort. In that silence, I learned that not every moment needs an answer. Not every question needs to be solved. Some things just need to be held. That realization alone took a weight off my shoulders I didn't know I was carrying. God began to show me my relationships differently. Not in a critical way, but in an honest one. I saw where I'd been present physically but absent emotionally, where I'd listen to reply instead of listening to understand, where I'd assume time would fix things that actually needed attention. Those insights didn't come with shame. They came with an invitation to show up differently while I still could. I remember one morning thinking about my kids, not in the abstract way we sometimes do, ticking off concerns and hopes, but really seeing them. Their lives, their struggles, their questions. I realized how often I'd tried to protect them by being strong instead of being real, by offering solutions instead of sharing uncertainty. That morning, I decided to change that. Not with a speech, just with presence. Conversations started to shift. I didn't rush them anymore. I didn't steer them away from hard topics. Faith came up naturally, not as a lesson, but as a shared curiosity. Some listened quietly, some pushed back, some didn't say much at all, and I learned to be okay with that. The hour had taught me that transformation doesn't need to be forced, it needs to be lived. There was a morning when God showed me something uncomfortable about my work. I'd always taken pride in being disciplined, dependable, committed. Those are good things, but I saw how easily they'd turned into identity, how much of my self-worth was tied to productivity, to being relevant, to being needed. I saw how fear of stillness had kept me busy for years, busy enough not to ask deeper questions. That morning, I understood something clearly. I wasn't afraid of slowing down. I was afraid of who I might be without momentum, without applause, without a schedule full enough to justify my existence. And in that realization, I felt God gently say, without words, "You are already enough." That thought stayed with me long after the hour ended. Around 6 months into this practice, something happened that marked a turning point. I was sitting there as usual, breathing slowly, not asking for anything when a question surfaced. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried weight. What do you want to be remembered for? Not by critics, not by audiences, by the people who actually knew me. I'd answered that question before, easily, smoothly, but in that moment, those answers felt thin. Awards fade, projects end, recognition moves on to someone else. What stays is how you made people feel, whether you loved well, whether you were kind when no one was watching, whether you pointed towards something bigger than yourself. That question rearranged my priorities in ways I didn't fully understand at first. I started choosing differently, not just projects, but pace. I stopped saying yes out of habit. I started leaving space. Space for rest, space for people, space for God to interrupt my plans without me resenting it. I noticed how differently I handled disappointment. Things still fell apart, doors still closed, plans still changed. But instead of tightening my grip, I loosened it. Instead of demanding answers, I brought the confusion into that quiet hour and laid it down. I didn't always leave with clarity, but I always left with peace. And that was new. One morning, I realized something else. I'd been living my life like I was the director, managing scenes, controlling outcomes, adjusting angles, and God gently showed me that real life doesn't work that way. There is a director, but it isn't me. My role wasn't to control the story. It was to show up faithfully and play my part with integrity. That understanding was both humbling and freeing. I didn't have to carry everything anymore. I didn't have to make every decision perfect. I didn't have to know how it would all turn out. I just had to trust the one who did. People around me started asking questions, not because I preached, but because I changed. I was less guarded, more patient, quieter in a way that invited conversation instead of shutting it down. Some thought it was a phase. Some joked that I'd softened with age, but a few leaned in. They wanted to know what had shifted. I told them about the hour, not as a formula, not as a rule, just as an experience. Some tried it, some didn't. I learned not to measure the impact. That wasn't my job. The hour had taught me that growth isn't contagious through pressure. It spreads through authenticity. One of the most meaningful changes came quietly. One morning, one of my sons joined me. No big announcement, just pulled up a chair and sat down. We didn't talk. We didn't explain. We just shared the silence. That hour did more for our relationship than years of trying to say the right thing. I understood then that silence can be a language, that presence can be a gift, that some of the deepest connections happen without words, and that God often works in those spaces we usually rush past. The hour taught me patience, not the passive kind, the active kind that trusts timing, that believes delays aren't denials, that understands waiting isn't wasted time. It taught me to let go of outcomes and hold on to faith instead, and slowly, almost without noticing, the restlessness that had started this whole journey faded, not because my life became simpler, but because my soul became quieter. The noise didn't disappear, I just stopped letting it lead. That's what the hour gave me, not answers to every question, not immunity from pain, but a steady place to stand when everything else shifted. A reminder every morning that I wasn't alone in this story, that I never had been. Now, when I look back at the man I was before all of this, I don't judge him. I understand him. He was doing the best he could with what he knew at the time. He thought strength meant endurance. He thought silence meant distance. He thought faith was something you carried quietly in the background while you handled life on your own. But the last few years have taught me something different. They've taught me that real strength comes from surrender, and real silence is where you finally hear the truth. There's a verse my grandmother used to say when life felt heavy. I didn't understand it back then. I barely remembered it for years. Be still and know that I am God. I used to think being still meant stopping, giving up. Now I know it means trusting. It means stepping out of the driver's seat and realizing you were never meant to carry the whole road by yourself. That 1 hour every morning didn't make my life perfect. I still face uncertainty. I still lose people. I still have days when the future feels unclear. But the difference is this: I don't face those moments alone anymore. I don't fight them with clenched fists. I bring them into that quiet place and let them rest there. And every single time, even when nothing changes on the outside, something settles on the inside. Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of trust. That's what I learned. Trust that there's a purpose even when I can't see it. Trust that closed doors are sometimes protection. Trust that waiting isn't punishment, but preparation. And trust that God doesn't waste anything. Not pain, not loss, not even silence. As I've gotten older, time feels different. You start measuring life less by achievements and more by moments. Conversations you didn't rush. Apologies you finally made. Hands you held when words weren't enough. I can say honestly now, the years since I started that 1 hour prayer practice have been the richest years of my life, not because I accomplished more, but because I discovered more. I discovered that God isn't distant. He's personal. He cares about the small details we think don't matter. He cares about the thoughts we never say out loud. He cares about the quiet disappointments we carry alone. And He's been speaking all along, patiently, lovingly, waiting for us to slow down enough to listen. Prayer, I learned, isn't about saying the right words. It's not about impressing God or convincing Him to do what we want. It's about relationship, about showing up honestly, about being willing to sit in silence and admit, I don't have all the answers. That kind of prayer changes you, it softens you, it steadies you. I spent years playing characters who survived by being tough, by keeping their emotions locked away, and there's a version of strength in that, but it's incomplete. The silence that really transforms you isn't the silence of isolation. It's the silence of listening, the silence where you stop performing and start being real. I'm not sharing this to tell anyone what they should believe. I'm not here to preach. I'm just telling you what happened when I stopped running. When I stopped filling every moment with noise. when I gave God one uninterrupted hour of my day and said, I'm listening. That hour changed how I see the world, how I see other people, how I see myself. If you're watching this and something feels unfinished inside you, if you've achieved what you thought you wanted but still feel restless, maybe that feeling isn't failure, maybe it's an invitation to slow down, to sit still, to listen. You don't have to start with an hour, start with 15 minutes. Sit somewhere quiet, turn everything else off. Don't bring a list, don't bring expectations, just bring honesty. Tell God you're listening and then be still. It might feel uncomfortable at first. That's okay. Growth often does. Don't expect fireworks. Don't expect instant answers. Just show up day after day. Let the silence do its work. Let the noise settle. Let God meet you where you are, not where you think you should be. I don't know what God will show you. I don't know what He'll remind you of, or what He'll gently ask you to let go of. But I do know this: whatever He has to say will be worth hearing, worth more than success, worth more than recognition, worth more than anything you're chasing right now. I'm in the later chapters of my life. I don't know how many pages I have left, but I know this: giving God that 1 hour every morning gave me something I didn't even know I was searching for. Peace, real peace, the kind that stays when circumstances change, the kind that doesn't depend on applause or control. My grandmother was right. God is always talking. The trick is getting quiet enough to hear Him. That's what the 1 hour prayer rule gave me: quiet. Clarity, a relationship that transformed everything. And if you're willing to listen, maybe, just maybe, it can give you something unforgettable too. Thank you for sitting with me in this moment. May you find your own quiet place, your own hour, and your own encounter with the God who's been waiting to speak to you all along.